Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
The new Apple Watch Series 10 is here. It has the biggest display ever. It's also the thinnest Apple Watch ever, making it even more comfortable on your wrist. And it's the fastest charging Apple Watch, getting you 8 hours of charge in just 15 minutes. Introducing the all-new Apple Watch Series 10, now available for the first time in glossy jet black aluminum. Compared to previous generation, iPhone XS or later required. Charge time and actual results will vary.
Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to DBR Bites, episode 66. It is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and Army is coming to town on Friday night. The Duke Blue Devils take on the Army Black Knights, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the ACC Network on Friday. I am Donald Wine. I am here to host this preview of the Army Black Knights. With me, I have Jason Evans. Jason, hello. How are we doing?
I'm doing good. This is going to be an interesting preview. Let me just get started on something, if I can. Army is different than every other team in college basketball this year. Do you know why, Donald?
Because they're the United States Military Academy and they're full of players who are going to be going on to compete in something other than sports after they graduate?
Well, it's sort of an aspect of that. They don't do transfers.
Well, yeah, neither does right. Navy, neither does Air Force, because I know you just... Go ahead. Tell them why.
Yeah. All of college basketball is full of transfers of guys moving from program to program. You don't do that at Army. You don't do that at Navy or at Air Force. Once you've been there, once you start your third season, you're committed. You're on board. There's no transferring.
It's really year one, but also it's because they are literally not allowed per their charter to accept any transfers, not just athletic ones, but also academic ones as well.
Yeah, exactly. It makes them different than anyone else. And the interesting thing is, of course, it makes them the way college basketball teams used to look, with guys who are in the program, play together for years and years. This is an Army team that has a pretty good bit of experience, a lot of juniors and seniors, and it's just going to be a little different for Duke than anyone else we face in the year.
Yeah, so let's preview the United States Military Academy, again, a.k.a. the Army Black Knights. They are 1-0 on the season, just like Duke is. They defeated UAlbany 67-59 at home in their first game. Jason, I want to start generally. We're going to talk about the roster later, but one thing about their roster that is different from their roster last year is they have about 13 fewer players, because last year's roster had 25 players on their roster. I didn't know that was legal. But again, they don't do, academic or athletic scholarships, so I guess they can load up with however many players they want. Last year, they were 10-22. They were 6-12 in the Patriot League. They finished 8 out of 10 teams and lost in the first round of their conference tournament. But in general, this year, so far, again, one game of substance here, but they're 266th in KenPom and 322nd in Bart Torvik. They have an average adjusted efficiency of 266.
Hey, say that three times. Say that 3 times fast.
I will not. We don't have that much time on these bites. 262nd on adjusted defense, and their tempo is 356. Jason, how many teams are in Division I this year? I think it's 364.
Yep, it's 364, and they are 356 in tempo. Yeah.
Yes, they're towards the bottom. They average, again, one game, but this is a team just like Maine who were not expected to get a ton of possessions out of. It'll be incumbent on Duke to kind of control that tempo. But Jason, let's get into the offense and defense and really just how they play. Again, one game of sample size here, so we're going back a little bit to how these guys played last year as well. But give me a little bit of what you have on Army.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 1-0 after beating Albany 67-59. That was a game where they were trailing to Albany by 7 points, and then they had a strong second half in that game. Went on a 14-0 run to secure the win there. They won the game by playing good defense, especially at the 3-point line. They held Albany to just 4 of 24. That's 16.7% shooting from three. That is a very, very poor job of shooting, or a very good job of playing defense by Army. I guess we will see when they come and play Duke, a team that is a elite 3-point shooting team. I think that one of the really interesting aspects of this game is the question of whether Army's strong 3-point defense will be able to counteract Duke's strong 3-point offense. It's worth noting, as we said, that they play super slow. One of the 10 slowest paces in all of college basketball. And that slow pace allows them to hold teams down. Last year, there were only 2 teams in the entire season who managed to score 80 points on Army. Donald, I believe that this Duke team is they're great on defense. I believe that they're a team that scores in bunches, and I'm going to be really interested in seeing if we can get into the 80s on this Army team that is great at keeping teams from getting there. Now, part of why they're great at it is because they're basically, working the shot clock down to next to nothing on each one of their possessions. So there's just not as much, not as many possessions for you to be able to have chances to score. But I'll be very interested if Duke is able to do sort of what they did to Maine, another team that plays really slowly. If Duke's able to get up into the 90s, this is a sign of how this Duke team is able to enforce its will on the opposition much more so than the opposite.
And, just like you said, Maine, a team that was very slow on tempo. Army, a team that's even slower on tempo. This doesn't feel like a trend, but also, again, it shows you that John Shire is scheduling teams that are going to be doing a myriad of things early in this early part of the season. Because, again, after this, we have Kentucky, and they do not play slow. But these two games playing slow is, again, akin to what you might see from a team in the NCAA tournament and some of these teams that we may see in the ACC. I think the best part about that in playing these teams is, yes, we like to make it a track meet. And can you make the tempo such that a team that does not want to go fast has to get into the track meet with you? And
Yeah.
yes, this is a smaller team, younger team, or yeah, I say younger, a mid-major, low-major team. And I get that they are probably going to just try and play their game because they're in Cameron, and it's Army also, right? They're akin to following instructions. That is a part of what they do. But I think the interesting thing about Duke is when we want to go fast, and we did go fast at times against Maine. What happens when we have to slow down and play a half court offense where we're getting into the shot clock 10, 20, 25 seconds before we get a shot off? Does that frustrate a team? It could. But I think that's the test for this team with Duke is seeing how, again, the leaders step up and show how to run and manage an offense when the team wants to grind you into the dirt.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed about them last year that may be different with this year that we're going to have to explore and find out. Last year they shot a ton of threes. They literally had the 25th highest 3-point field goal rate in the land. Now, they didn't hit them at a very good clip. They only hit about 32% from long range, but they shot a ton of 3-pointers the season ago. So I was a little bit surprised. In their game against Albany, the first game this year, they eased up a good bit on firing at will. They only attempted 17 3-pointers in that game. Now, they only hit 5 of them. So they're still a bad 3-point shooting team. 5 of 17 comes out to 29.4%. But I think it's really interesting that maybe they are trying to ease back a bit on just firing away from the perimeter a lot, especially because if you sort of look at their players, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, they don't have a lot of guys who you go, that's a dude who needs to be shooting a ton from the outside. They have a fair number of guys who are probably better off taking the ball to the basket than they are firing it up from the 3-point line.
Yeah, they didn't shoot well at all last year from any part of the floor, much less 3-point. But yes, I agree. It seems like, again, one game. It seems like the plan here for Army is to be a bit more balanced in their approach on offense, shooting, almost an equal number of twos and threes, or maybe taking more twos, I should say. But I also think that it doesn't matter for them if they can't make shots. And against Albany, it's not like they were lighting the world on fire. They did win, but they weren't efficient in doing so. And I think the idea for Duke is to frustrate them, just like Maine, into taking some bad shots. Maine hit a couple of those, right? We talked about the shots that would make Patrick Ewing stop practice and make everybody run laps. But I think that that's the key here is you want them to shoot those kind of shots because they have a low percentage of going in. If they go in, hey, you chalk it up and you move on. But more of those are going to stay out of the net than not. And then you can take it and go. And really the dictating of the pace is going to be how we move in transition and get the ball up the floor very quickly. Something, again, we're taller than them. We have more athleticism than them. And at the end of the day, there's not a lot of guys who are going to be able to handle the interior presence, especially when someone is crashing towards the rim.
Yeah, exactly. The bottom line in this game is it's Duke's height, length, and athleticism against Army just trying to counteract those things, and I'm not quite sure how they will counteract them. There's a darn good reason that Ken Pomeroy says Duke wins this game by around 27 points. He's got Duke winning at 84-57. We've talked about it'll be a race between can Duke impose their faster speed, their faster pace will on Army's slower pace. But I think the other thing is just going to be Duke's overwhelming size. We talked about it all off season. No one on this team's less than 6'5". Army's full of guys who are less than 6'5". In fact, I think the biggest guy they're going to put on the floor is like 6'8", maybe 6'9". Yep. Yeah, and I think I saw someplace that like their average height at Army, if you factor in minutes and who's playing and stuff like that, is like 6'3". Like the average Army guy is a couple inches shorter than Duke's smallest player. I think that size, that length is just going to be a huge problem for Army.
Also because in the Army, you can only be so tall before you are not able to do Army things. So they don't like to bring in a lot of guys. Yeah, you have the occasional 7-footer, but you don't like to bring those in.
I thought that was a Navy thing. I know in the Navy you're not.
It was
allowed
a
to
Navy thing
submarines,
also because of the submarines. Submarines are a certain height. And David Robinson could, the admiral could not go to the Navy because he was too tall. But they've stopped also just bringing in guys that are super tall because what are they going to do after they graduate? So that sort of thing. But I will say, getting into some of these players, there's a lot of stuff on these players. And Jason, I know you have the lowdown on a couple surprising facts about the Army team, but I want you to hold on to it for just a couple minutes while we take care of this commercial break. More on the players for Army on the other side. We are back and we are previewing the Army Black Knights. We are getting into the players. And as I mentioned last year, 25 players on the roster. This year, not quite as many. I think we're really at a good clip of about 10 guys who are factoring into this team. But Jason, getting started with the players, I know there's a couple that have some amazing stories. And of course, they're in the Army, so a lot of them have some crazy paths on how they got to this point. But let's start with the players that have some amazing stories as we get into previewing who we're going to see.
Yeah, so there's a player that you're going to pay attention to in this game. He's their point guard. He's a senior. His name is Jalen Rucker. Jalen Rucker is just 5'10", but dude has great range. I mean, he's going to end up taking 5 or 6 threes at least in this game, and he often shoots them from a good bit beyond the three-point line. As a sophomore, he shot almost 38% from three. I mean, really, really successful from firing from long range. He was way down under 30% as a junior, but this is a guy who's capable of a big game if he gets hot. Jalen Rucker's his name. He averaged around 17 points per game his past 2 years at Army. Donald, I want to note something about him. You notice I didn't say last year. I was like, oh, his 2 years, his sophomore year, his junior year. That's because Jalen Rucker tried to do something incredibly unusual, and we alluded to this earlier on the show. After his junior season, where he'd averaged 17 points per game, Jalen Rucker said, I want to transfer. I want to go someplace else. I think he recognized that he had talent in basketball to maybe be a little bit more than just a kid playing for Army. And he attempted to transfer. Well, the U.S. government said, no, sorry. Once you have begun your third year, you are required to fulfill your military service. Once you start your third year at West Point, the Army says you owe them a commitment. And so Jalen Rucker was not allowed to go anywhere else. And he took last season off while he sort of tried to work on this and tried to see if he could arrange for a transfer. It never happened. So now he is back with the team. Apparently, there are no hard feelings, nothing wrong with anything like that. But this is a guy who was first team All Patriot League as a junior 2 years ago. He is super experienced because he already has 3 years at Army plus a redshirt year. So he's a little bit older. Jalen Rucker is someone to really pay attention to. They've got another guy with an interesting story. If you're an ACC fan from the 1990s, early 2000s, Donald, this is right in your area. I'm about to tell you the name of the center for Army, and you're going to go, wait a second, that rings a little bit of a bell. The guy's name is A.J. Allenspaugh. Does that ring a bell with you at all? Remember Clemson? Clemson had a center named Adam Allenspaugh. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Allenspaugh is an unusual name. So I tried to figure out, is A.J. Allenspaugh related to Alan Allenspaugh? And I thought, they're from the same town, and Alan tweets lots of things about the Army team. I have not 100% confirmed that this is his son, but I'm like 98% that that Adam Allenspaugh's son is A.J. Allenspaugh. There's too many A's in this. I'm tripping over this left and right, I think.
There's a lot of A's in both names. Also, thank you for making me older, Jason, today, because I remember when he was playing at Clemson, and now if he's his son, his nephew, his great uncle, whatever that is, right? It's too many years apart here. For me,
exactly right. For folks who don't quite remember Adam Allenspaugh, he was almost, I think he was 7-footer. He played for Clemson like 99 and the early aughts, that kind of thing. Was actually a fairly decent player for them for a couple of years late in his career, but that Clemson team wasn't very good. But in any event, ACC connection there for the Army center, A.J. Allenspaugh. And then the last player thing that I just sort of wanted to discuss very quickly, in their first game, which we mentioned where they beat Albany, the star of that game was a sophomore wing named Josh Scovins. He attacked the basket again and again and again. He's a 6'6" forward. He ended up getting to the free throw line 12 times in this game on his way to scoring 22 points. He scored a third of Army. Army scored 67 points in the game. He had 22 of them. It is not easy to get to 20 plus points if your team is only scoring in the 60s. But Josh Scovins managed to do it. He is a high usage player for them last year when he was a freshman. Really smart, does not get flustered. Guy apparently says he wants to be a pediatrician someday, wants to do medical work in the Army, and then eventually be a pediatrician. He's actually, even though he's only 6'6", he's a really good shot blocker, like a really good shot blocker for a guy of that size. I'm really interested in him, because he appears to be probably their best player. It's between him and that point guard Jalen Rucker that I told you about for their best player. But the reason I'm intrigued by Josh Scovins is I think this is a guy that you're going to see Cooper flag guard for Duke. And I'm going to be very interested in seeing how Cooper handles a guy who is going to be, again, a high usage player and a guy who is willing to take it inside and draw fouls on the opposition. If Army sort of has a formula for how do we make this game difficult for Duke, it's probably that Josh Scovins gets Cooper Flag in some foul trouble and that Jalen Rucker is bombing away in those 3-pointers and hitting them the way he did as a sophomore, not the way he did as a junior.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because when you look at their starting five from their first game, it's 5'10", Jalen Rucker, Ryan Curry at 6 foot, Blake Barker at 6'2", Josh Scovins at 6'6", and then A.J. Allenspaugh at 6'8". Now, it seems like you could put either Cooper Flag or Con Knipple on that. Mason Gillis, when he comes into a game, can guard him probably. So it'll be interesting to see the rotations there. Jason, I will say one guy off the bench that you want to pay attention to is Tate Laskowski. He had 6 points and 10 rebounds in their first game.
Yeah, I saw that.
Albany.
He had a big rebounding game in that first game. Yeah.
He had a big rebounding game, but the 6 points were the only points from their bench in that game. So they played 5 guys off the bench. He was the only guy that scored off the bench. He also had 3 turnovers, so he's prone to turn the ball over. Jalen Rucker, with the ball in his hand, had 4 turnovers, but again, as you mentioned, he's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. I am interested to see if they expand their bench a little bit, because last year, as I mentioned, they had 25 guys on the roster. They would play sometimes 13 or 14 guys heavy minutes in a game. Usually, I think it was 10 guys that averaged well above 10 minutes per game. In the stats game, we would have been gone crazy the number of guys who had got to 300 minutes if we were Army. This year, it seems like it's more of a 7-man rotation, and it's one. I'm wondering if they expand a little bit. Of course, if the game gets out of hand, that might be the case. But I'm interested to see if there is any further contribution from our bench, which leads me to my points about Duke. We should make sure that the bench is coming in ready to work. Because if there's a way that we can take Army out of this game quickly, it's not necessarily from the starters, it's from the bench. And if the bench could come in and still, have, again, no drop off and make it where Army is either tired with their 7 guys or they have to go down to guys who they may not count upon as much, we're in a good position. But I also think the way that Army plays, just like a lot of these teams, they like to get into the lane, make easy buckets, do backdoor cuts, things of that nature. This is going to be a big test of making sure we know where the guys are on the floor that are smaller than them. Because, again, almost every team that we face is going to have guys that are smaller than them. In this case, it's much smaller than a lot of the guys that we will have on the court. Smallest guy that's going to come out there is Caleb Foster, and he's 6'5". He's going to be taller than most everybody on Army. But you can lose smaller guys behind you. You can lose in the weeds of the paint. So we need to make sure that we are not doing that. And I think other than that, we continue to hit threes. We continue to do the stifling defense and really, again, push the tempo to more of our game and less of theirs. We are going to have a fun ball game because I think the idea of scoring Jason 80 points requires us to uptick the tempo a little bit. You mentioned that the average game has about between 65 and 70 possessions. If you're over 70, that's pretty quick. If you're above 80, which I think we touched maybe once last year, you are screaming like everybody is tired. If we can get to 70, we're winning this ball game handily. And that's because, again, we will probably had a lot of possessions that end in easy buckets. Let's make it easy on ourselves against the United States Military Academy. Jason, anything else before we get out of here on these bites?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'm looking at, and I will admit that I didn't know to completely pay attention to this in Duke's first game. So that's why one of the reasons I'm going to be looking for it more in this game. I'm really looking to see who's going to be doing the initiating of the offense. And specifically the roles that Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor play in Duke's offense, because we saw the offense for the most part beginning with and running through Cooper Flagg and then to a lesser extent Con Knipple. And I've got no problem with that. They're both super high IQ guys, great creative players. Cooper Flagg especially, goodness knows that the ball needs to be in his hands as much as possible. But I'm really interested in seeing does Duke try to get more initiation of offense from Caleb Foster? Do they try and have Tyrese Proctor be something more than a release valve shooter on the wing? Because I think the best version of Duke, you have more playmakers on the floor. And hand in hand with that, I'm looking to see how much Duke is going to penetrate into the defense, beat a man, draw help, whatever it may be, and then pass the ball. I thought Duke did a great job of passing around the exterior, around the perimeter. I didn't see as much passing on the inside. Pick and roll passing, help defense comes to you and you dish it off to another guy. I'm hoping to see a little bit more of that in this game. These are not big complaints. This is not me saying that, Duke had some big fatal flaw. And I recognize that our first game against Maine and this game against Army, we're playing teams that are in the bottom 100 or so teams in college basketball. So maybe any lesson taken from these games is, at best a minor lesson. But those are the things I'm really looking forward for Duke on offense. And then on defense, Donald, impose your will the same way you did against Maine. We talked about it, Donald, how much Maine was shooting one-on-one shots, fadeaway, step back, 1-foot jumpers that Patrick Ewing hates. Mm-hmm. And I want to see that again. That is what makes this Duke team a top 5 defensive team in the country, if the opposition is unable to get into any kind of offensive flow. And I think this Duke team is very much capable of doing that against a team like Army.
You mentioned the offensive sets that we do and who initiates the offense. The other thing I'll be looking at is, again, I know still has that like makeshift receiver's glove on his hand, but I'm wondering how much of the offense starts by inbounding the ball to man in the middle and seeing how he can, again, he's going to be 6 inches clear, 5 inches clear of everybody else in the court, short of Cooper Flag. So so there's going to be opportunities there for him to impose as well. But again, he has to be fed the ball. Could it be an ebb and flow of, Caleb bringing the ball up and starting it, maybe direct entry passes from whoever brings the ball up to man to start everything around. I'll be interested to see all that because yes, these two teams are not big and they're not as athletic as we are. But these are ways to work things out when you do get to the bigger games, which look at the calendar starting next week. So I'm not looking ahead to next week, but I do want to focus on what we're doing tomorrow night to, again, build on what we're doing, build some of these NBA type sets that John Shire wants to implement where guys can feel free to run loose, but also have some moves that nobody else can counter because, hey, most teams don't have NBA caliber players on them. So this is an advantage that we have. I feel like we should take advantage of it. Again, tomorrow night, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern time on ACC Network. Check your local listings for if you have the ACC Network. If you don't, you should probably get it because most of our games this year are going to be at least on that channel or close to it. So make sure you have the ACC Network. But that will do it for this episode of DBR Bites. We will be back on the weekend after the Army game, probably after the NC State game. We're not sure when we're going to record, but again, get your headlines in, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. For Jason, I am Donald Wine. It is now time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.